Judaism can be hijacked. I'll be doing everything right because I'm afraid that if I don't, then God is the big bully who's going to hurt me. So I'm not actually connecting to God. I'm just seeing God as something I need to keep myself safe from. My name is Devori Nussbaum, and I am from London, and I am a psychotherapist, and I'm also a teacher.
So as a Jewish psychotherapist, do you have a different approach?
So I do, absolutely. And that's not necessarily to do with being a Jewish psychotherapist, but more to do with my own interests. I am very interested and have always been in the teachings of Chassidic. And I have spent a lot of time integrating those teachings into my practice. They guide me a lot in my understanding of the human condition and how to help people to be the best versions of themselves.
Can you share some examples of how Chassidut and psychotherapy, I would guess, merge?
Really, psychology is the study of the mind and the study of the emotions of a human being. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains that a soul is made up of 10 powers, and those 10 powers are 3 faculties of the mind and 7 emotions. So really, our soul energy is emotional and psychological energy, and it's more than that as well. There is more to it, and we're not going to get into that complexity, like what that means according to Chassidus. But on a practical level, our soul is really our inner world and our psyche and our emotional state of being. So when you understand it or you perceive it this way, then basically a lot of Tanya is talking about our psychological, internal process and struggle. And the Alter Rebbe also explains that we have 2 souls. We have a divine soul and an animal soul. And the way I understand animal soul is really our defense mechanisms. Well, one of the reasons why people struggle so much in life is because they don't know who they are. They don't have a deep innate sense of self. And as a result, they live from a place of defensiveness. So they're constantly trying to prove that they are good and right and in order to feel safe in the world, and constantly looking for validation because they don't have an innate core sense of self. So this is what I would call the animal soul consciousness doesn't have an innate sense of self, because ultimately our deepest self is God. And the animal soul consciousness is really a veil of the divine soul consciousness, giving us a sense of, I'm separate, I'm alone. So now, as a result of that, I have to prove myself and I have to make myself into something, because the innate belief and starting point of the animal soul is, I'm nothing, I'm worthless, I don't know what I am. If I'm working with someone, usually what the things they're coming with are their pain for not feeling who they are, their defense mechanisms that are getting in the way of them being able to connect with people in an honest, authentic way, the amount of self-consciousness that they're living with and the fears that they're living with in their life that we need to sift through, work with, and then bring it to, well, who am I truly? What am I really? And how does a person then connect to their divine true essence? And the Alter Rebbe explains very clearly in Tanya, this is done through meditation and actually developing the prefrontal cortex function, through which he explains is the Chabad aspect of the soul, which is the Chachma, Bin, and Das, the way a person thinks. I believe Chabad is more than just the prefrontal cortex function, but it is the entryway into the brain. And if I am to be able to live a life of choice as a human being and to not live from a place of reactivity and impulsive defensiveness, I want to be able to truly connect to people and truly be present in my life. I do need to develop my prefrontal cortex function. I need to learn how to focus my attention. I need to learn how to meditate and how to take what I know and create visceral experiences based on what I know, to be able to actually feel what I am, not just know it in my head. And from that place, I can truly feel in a space of joy and peace and regulation in my life, and have choice over who I want to be in the world, and take risks and do things that are in line with my value system. And that's what I believe gives us, or what we are capable of. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, every human being is capable of being a conscious human being, which means a choiceful human being. And that's what gives us meaning and purpose in life, which is ultimately what creates, I would call, mental health.
Do you think spirituality also plays a role in mental health?
Absolutely, because we need to address as human beings our bodies and also our minds when it comes to mental health. And if we just address our bodies, I may breathe and I may be able to release tension from my system. And then as soon as I have a fearful thought, or I have a belief system that is telling me that this is a dangerous situation that I'm in, my body will just go back into a state of a sympathetic state. If, on the other hand, I just work with my mind, I create mental clarity and I understand what's going on, but I haven't worked with my body, this too isn't going to give me a state of internal peace. I have to work with both. As a human being, we have the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya 3 layers to our beings, which is the divine soul at the core. The animal soul surrounds it like a veil that conceals from it its true essence, but also puts it in a state of, how am I going to survive in this world as a separate entity, and gives me my own separate identity. And then surrounding that is my body. And of course, this doesn't mean literal surrounding, because souls are not bound by space and time. But it's really the investment of the energy, and it's invested in one thing and then invested in the other, and so on. And we often hang out in the animal soul consciousness. That's our we identify as that, as human, as well. The Alter Rebbe explains, unless you're a tzaddik, you're going to identify yourself as your animal soul consciousness. So we definitely, one of our main roles in life, spiritual roles in life, is to transform our animal soul consciousness. And transforming our animal soul consciousness, the Frierdiker Rebbe actually says in Likutei Diburim, he explains how this work goes. He says, if you imagine your divine soul consciousness to be like a sage and your animal soul consciousness to be like a simple person, you got to put your arm around the simple person. The sage puts his arm around the simple person and says, come, let me teach you. Let me show you. This isn't about, I don't need you. This isn't about, let's get rid of you. It's about, let me show you, let me teach you, let me educate you. And through that relationship, even if the animal soul consciousness doesn't yet fully understand, it feels somewhat special because of the attention it's getting from the prefrontal cortex or the divine soul consciousness. And it is already going to be feeling somewhat more regulated. It's going to be feeling somewhat more regulated. And so what that means inside of our consciousness is that when we notice we have those limiting beliefs or those fear-based thoughts, when we get curious with ourselves and we say, I wonder why I'm thinking that way. I wonder where that belief comes from. I wonder if this belief is even true. I could have assumed this when I was a child because I didn't know any better. And then I could be living my whole life still based on this false belief system that it's historical, like it's come from the past, or it wasn't even true in the first place. And now when I bring it into my awareness, when I have awareness of it, I have the opportunity to educate it, to teach it something new. And through this process, I slowly transform my fundamental perspective of the world. And once I slowly transform my fundamental perspective of the world, partly the way that I do that is through spiritual teachings, because I can look at the world superficially and I could think that the world is doom and gloom. There's terrible things happening in the world. I can feel helpless. I can feel hopeless. I can feel terrified. If I really think that I am in control, if I really think that I am the one who is, running the show, which my animal soul does, it has this drive to be in control, then I'm going to be anxious all the time because there are so many things that are not in our circle of choice to control. There are so many things we don't know. There are so many things that are happening around us that we don't have the capacity to do anything about. And if I don't have a spiritual way of perceiving this, of understanding that there is a God, and that I do have things that I can do that can create meaning and impact here, and that nothing is random. And if I don't have this belief system, I'm very quickly going to go back into those survival belief systems that make sense based on the superficial perspective of reality, but they actually don't help me create inner peace. And so learning these divine truths and integrating them into our lives and imagining, what would I feel if I really knew this? This is where it's key. This is where you bring it into somatics. I could tell you God exists, but if I don't, first of all, I need to define to myself, what even is that? What even does that mean? But if I understand God to be a loving and connecting energy that is holding all of creation together and is constantly present and connected with me, then how would I feel if I really knew that this was a conscious awareness of me, loving me all of the time, that I was part of something so much greater than myself? What would I feel in my body if I really knew that? And now, when I first asked that question, you may say, I don't know. But you have to now focus your attention on this and really think and imagine, if this was really the truth, if I really did feel this, what would I feel? What would I feel? And you have to stay with that for a while. This is what the Alter Rebbe describes in Tanya as contemplation. And it's a key factor in actually feeding or expanding or developing our divine soul consciousness, is we have to actually take the time to choose to meditate on these things, to focus our attention on them, not just to understand them as ideas, but once we do, we spend the time and we chew it over, we can actually come to have a visceral experience of a deep sense of love and awe of life and of God. And that changes our whole experience of being alive. This spiritual experience, it's not just a knowing, it's a spiritual experience. And once I've had that spiritual experience, I'm never going to be the same again because I feel something deeper. Now my nervous system knows something. My cellular memory has something. It has an experience that I can go back to. And the more I give myself those experiences on an ongoing basis, the more I'm expanding my true sense of who I am. And the more I'm able to navigate and have capacity to dialogue with those voices that come into the back of my mind, she'll always be there and say, hey, but what about that thing you can't control? And what about that thing that you don't know? And I can say, you know what? I know I can't control it. And I know that I don't know everything. And I also know that God is here and God is holding me. And whatever's going to be is going to be okay. And we're going to get through this. And I can not just say it as a logical thing in my head, but I can actually feel into the frequency of trust in my body. I can show those parts of myself that are afraid in my mind what it feels like to trust in the body by consciously choosing to move my body into a frequency of trust, which would mean to breathe and relax my muscles and feel that sense of serenity and being held.
So infusing spirituality into therapy, it's more beneficial for all therapists. Is that correct?
1,000%. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, more modern psychologies are doing that now anyway. They're moving towards spirituality. Even in the 12-step program, there is this idea that there is a higher power that we're connecting to. And Carl Jung speaks about it a lot. This is something that is really discussed a lot in psychology. And definitely bringing the spiritual connection in is a very important key to our state of mental health. Because if I don't believe that there is a higher power, then my defense mechanism is definitely going to believe that I am in control. And then I'm not in control. So the amount of stress that that's going to cause in my life is going to be tremendous. It's going to be very, very big toll on me.
So talking about infusing spirituality with therapy, how does especially young people who tend not to be more spiritual, how do you suggest a young person achieve this spiritual or godly awareness?
You got to start with a relationship. The adult who is trying to have this conversation with these children cannot influence them in any way if they don't have a connection to them. And this is the same thing internally. If I want to influence any part of my consciousness, any part of my defense mechanism, if I am not inviting it to the table, like the example where the Frierdiker Rebbe talks about the sage who puts his arm around the simple person, if I'm not inviting them to the table with respect and curiosity and interest, I am not going to have any influence over that part of myself. It's going to hide and hijack me. And it's the same thing with youth, with children. If you want to have impact and if you want to influence them, you have to first build a relationship with them. You have to first create a connection with them. And this is already developing their brains and developing their minds. Anytime a child is in a parasympathetic nervous system state where they're relaxed and happy and joyful in the presence of an adult or someone who they respect, this is already developing their prefrontal cortex function. It's already developing their capacity for spiritual connection. It's already developing their capacity to think deeper, to get curious, to ask logical questions, which is everything you need to develop spiritual awareness. Without a parasympathetic nervous system state, there is no capacity to develop a connection with something higher. And often when we do develop or think we've developed a connection with something higher from a fear-based place, it's actually part of our defense mechanism. So Judaism can be hijacked. I'll be doing everything right because I'm afraid that if I don't, then God is the big bully who's going to hurt me. So I'm not actually connecting to God. I'm just seeing God as something I need to keep myself safe from. And this unfortunately happens a lot. People's Judaisms a lot can be hijacked by the animal soul consciousness, which means I am actually actively engaging in Judaism, but I'm not actually, my heart isn't open and I'm not feeling that connection, that flow in my relationship with God. And I'm not feeling the spiritual connection. And I'm not curious about learning and growing. And everything I do from guilt or fear or shame. And this is very unfortunate and sad because there is so much beauty that could be had in the spiritual connection. And when we offer that relationship to children and we give them the capacity to be in relationship with us in that open, curious state, which I would call play, where they can ask questions and we can explore things together, that's where they start really evolving. And if they respect us as human beings, they're going to want to be like us. And they're going to ask us how we got to be how we are. And they're going to learn from who we are more than what we say. And so that's, I think, the starting point. There has to be a starting point there.
So you touched upon, the the ideal way to create this relationship with young people and spirituality. But what if somebody who already has that punitive version of God that you spoke about that is dangerous? How do you suggest to remedy that?
So again, you start with creating a relationship. And then there's one step you do, which isn't, if you're starting from scratch, you don't need to do this step. And that is actually hearing and processing the pain of how it got to be that way. How did it become that way, that God became punitive? And it could be because, maybe I had an abusive father, and I learned in school that God is your father in heaven. And I associated in my child consciousness that father, heaven, my father, okay, he's a bully. So I made that association and forever saw God in the same way, or somatically experienced God in the same way that I somatically experienced my father, which is fear when I'm in his presence. So I have to unpick that. I have to undo that until I can create something new. And so that step would require, first of all, again, the relationship has to be there in the beginning. And then there has to be space for validation. There has to be space to be heard. There has to be space for it to be witnessed and seen. Space for the body to release the tension it was holding until the person becomes curious about, so if God isn't that bully in the sky, what is God? And when the person comes with genuine curiosity, that's where they're going to learn something new. And that's where they're going to be able to integrate new information. So bringing a person out of that state of fight-flight response through the somatic work, through the compassion, through understanding it completely makes sense why you ended up having that belief system. And also there might be another reality that you don't know yet. And perhaps what would happen if we got curious and explored that together? That would be the great way to go.
In Judaism, we pray around 3 times a day. Is there any upside for emotional and mental well-being to setting aside those times and praying every day?
So the question is, what is the Chassidic definition of prayer? Because prayer is not just saying words. According to Chassidus, prayer is really a deep state of, first of all, the mind is focused, which means I'm very present and connected. It's not only that, but it's also a felt, visceral experience of love and awe of God. And if we would actually think about what that would do for our mental health, if we were able to sit 3 times a day and take all of the stresses of our lives and the fear-based consciousness of our lives and learn how to focus our minds. This is a training that we need to learn to do. Focus our minds away from that for a short period of time and actually become present with the experience of the oneness of God and the unity of God and being in a spiritual experience for a certain amount of time every single day. That would massively impact our lives. And the Alter Rebbe actually explains that what this does, in Tanya he explains, it gives a person more choice. In times throughout the day between prayer, when I feel I'm driven by reactivity and defensiveness, or being driven towards anything that is misaligned from my value system, those moments of prayer actually leave an impact in my nervous system that give me the capacity to have more choice in those moments and choose to actually act out of consciousness and actually align with my value system rather than being driven in that reactive state. So choosing to actually go into a state of prayer 3 times a day is extremely powerful in developing our prefrontal cortex function. And actually, prayer can become a deeply meaningful experience, not just something I do, tick off the list, and then move on with my day because I prayed, But actually, it becomes what prayer truly is. Prayer truly is a felt experience of love and awe of God, a connection, a conversation. It's a real conversation. It's not just lip service. And so absolutely, when we're able to connect and have those real conversations, it will impact our entire perspective of reality.
Can you share some Chassidic ideas of living a more joyous and harmonious life?
One of the ideas in Tanya, which I really love, is that the Alter Rebbe says one of the things you should meditate on to come to a state of feeling joy is, I did not create myself this way. And this is a beautiful meditation because it actually eliminates all of the blaming that we do on ourselves. Every time a person, one of the ways our defense mechanisms, our animal souls try and keep us in control is by finding either blaming ourselves for, I'm the problem, because if I'm the problem, then I can fix it, then I can change it, then I can be in control. Or blaming other people, but that actually puts us in a more victim position. And the blaming ourselves is sometimes the only way that we can empower ourselves in situations where we actually feel very helpless. And so the issue with that blame is that it often keeps us very stuck in negative thinking about ourselves, and therefore in a sympathetic nervous system state, and therefore in a state where our prefrontal cortexes are shut down. So we're not able to actually be present and engage with what is here in the present now. I'm like living more with old programming. So this thought process of I didn't create myself this way, especially if I made a mistake or I did something that I think is bad or wrong, to start with, I didn't create myself this way, and eliminate all of the blaming and shaming I could do with myself, and to acknowledge that God created me this way. He gave me this internal challenge. He gave me this external challenge. And I wonder what my opportunity for growth is. It already puts you in that position of curiosity. It opens your prefrontal cortex. And there might be grief. There might be in that state. Grief as in I may be sad or in pain about something. And yet that's very different. That open-hearted grief, and the Altruppist terms, this is called bitterness or miriris. It's a life force energy that was going through my body. It's very different than depression. The depression or the atzvus is the shutdown of numbness. It's hopelessness. It's, yeah, whatever, I'm bad anyway. And that keeps us really stuck, and it keeps us very disconnected from ourselves. It's more of a dorsal state in the nervous system. So if a person is living in that free state and they want to move into a parasympathetic state, what they have to do is actually move through the sympathetic nervous system state. So it's like a ladder. The dorsal state in the nervous system is the freeze response. The sympathetic state is the fight or flight response. And then the parasympathetic state is where we can connect and engage. So if I am feeling shut down and depressed and heavy, and this is often to do with the judgments I'm casting on myself and the hopelessness that I'm feeling about life. But when I move into that, I didn't create myself this way. I have the capacity to actually maybe grieve the pain of being in this way, right? And then actually saying, well, what are my opportunities? And I rise to the higher state. So moving through, feeling the energy of the emotions as they move through our bodies and allowing that to flow is actually the key to bringing us back into equilibrium. So this is one of the meditations that can really help us cut out a lot of the reasons why we shut ourselves down in defensiveness. So that's one of the things I really love that he teaches there. It's so powerful and so helpful to many people who really struggle with, especially when it comes to religious practice. They really struggle with a lot of religious guilt, and they really struggle with a lot of self-blame, and I'm really bad, and I really shouldn't be doing this, and I'm really there's something fundamentally wrong with me or bad with me. And as well as this meditation of I didn't create myself this way, the Alter Rebbe also goes through, I think from the chapters, I think it's chapter 26, quite a few chapters of Tanya, where he goes through any kind of reason why a person might judge themselves as being bad because of a certain struggle that they may be having. For example, I can't concentrate in prayer. That means my prayers are bad. I am struggling with something, I'm having thoughts that I feel inappropriate. That means I'm bad. These are the kind of issues that someone who was genuinely wanting to grow spiritually might very easily fall into a judgment on themselves as being bad and wrong as a result of being challenged in these particular ways. And the Alter Rebbe goes through them systematically, and he explains how none of these things are actually a proof in any kind of way that you are wrong or bad. In fact, it shows what an opportunity you have here. And ultimately, the divine and the animal soul consciousness are really there to help us grow. So the divine soul consciousness is our core essence, and the animal soul consciousness is constantly challenging or kind of trying to hijack it in order for the divine soul consciousness to rise above it. And every time that happens, we then integrate it more and integrate it more. So really the animal soul consciousness is there just to help us to push against it. It's like weights in the gym, to push against it so that we can grow in our active consciousness and our capacity to be more present and more choiceful and more focused. And that every time it comes up with a belief system about trying to put me down, judge me, to put me in a bad or wrong, it's really there for me to say, hold on a second. There's an interesting perspective that you think I'm bad and wrong. And actually, this is an opportunity. I'm in the gym. Let's see how I can refocus my attention. Let's see how I can breathe and release all of that, those negative and false belief systems, and come back into this moment and know that right now I have an opportunity to connect with myself, with God, with whatever's happening around me. It doesn't matter what I did 5 minutes ago, 5 hours ago, 5 years ago. Right now I can connect. Right now I am, in essence, truly divine, and I can shine my light, and I can be here now. And so he goes through all of the different belief systems that people might have, and he really shows with every single one of them how it's really all just an opportunity for growth, and that we are all in the gym in this lifetime, and that once we learn how to turn or to bring our prefrontal cortexes on, to use our Chabad, to regulate our nervous systems, we start noticing how much more conscious we can be as human beings, and really live from a place of choice, and really live from a place of connection with others, and a place from joy, and a place of really being successful and inspired in the way that we live. And with all the relationships that we have, we can really experience a lot of joy, and it's great.
The Rohr Jewish Learning Institute has the largest collection of Jewish media online. Hit subscribe for more.